let me dive in and teach you a little bit about some of the history of neurolinguistic programming here. Okay, so everyone should be able to see my screen. Yeah, okay. So what is NLP, right? So think of it as NLP was originally developed by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. John Grinder was a linguistics professor at the University of Santa Cruz. And what a lot of people don't know is before that, he actually worked for the CIA. And he was an expert at going in and modeling and learning and observing and noticing patterns of behavior. Richard Bandler was a grad student, and Nick, just jump in and correct me on any of these, but Richard Bandler was a grad student at University of Santa Cruz. And at the time, he was the teaching assistant to John Grinder. Now, he was also editing a book by a very famous therapist by the name of Fritz Perls on Gestalt therapy. And unfortunately, Fritz died before the book was able to be published. But to prepare for the book, they were doing these, Fritz would work with students up in front of the classroom for a couple hours, and then he would then spend time talking about what he did and breaking down his process to teach students how to do it. So they had all these videos of this. So when Fritz died, Richard was actually concerned about losing his funding to finish grad school. So he asked if he could take those videos, watch them, and then finish off the book. But when he started watching these videos, with the knowledge he had gotten from John Grinder, he noticed something very interesting. He noticed that what he saw Fritz doing with his body, with his language, with his questions, etc., was very different than what Fritz said he was doing. And he took this discrepancy to John Grinder and says, "Do you see what I see?" And John says, "Yeah, he's doing all these things and patterns that he's not even talking about. I don't think he's even aware of," which is very common, because when you become so, what we call unconsciously competent about what you're doing, a lot of times you forget these really mission critical parts, because it's just like you take it for granted. Like we all take for granted that there's oxygen around us and it's going to be there tomorrow, and it's like part of a necessary requirement for living. So if someone asks us, how do you live? We probably wouldn't even think of it, but because it's just so part of us. So the two of them got together and said, you know what, let's see if we can extract a really useful and correct model for what he's doing. A model that we can reproduce and teach to others. Wouldn't that be cool if we could take this magic that this amazing therapist is able to do and achieve with people, and find a formula or a recipe or a model that we can then reproduce and do on our own, right? And teach other people to do that. So originally they modeled two people, Fritz Perls and Virginia Satir. Virginia Satir was a very famous family therapist. Tim Halbom worked with her, and I'm sure he'll share stories throughout the training about that. And it wasn't until later on, when Milton Erickson saw the work they were producing from modeling Fritz and Virginia, that Milton Erickson got on board and let them model him as well. Milton Erickson was a very famous psychiatrist and medical hypnotherapist. So this is where hypnosis and NLP first kind of start to come together a little bit and create a union. Both of them work with this kind of other part of the mind, the deeper structure of the mind, and the unconscious mind as well. And all of these three change agents were very powerful and known for getting very incredible results. So this is kind of where the birth of NLP really began. And they first started developing it, noticing what they were doing and modeling that. So there's three ways I invite you to think about neurolinguistic programming. The first is a set of modeling tools that you can use once you get through this course to start to observe, model, and reproduce excellence in any field. So if you're really into music and you see a great musician, you can use your knowledge of NLP with your existing knowledge of music and learn at a deeper level, at a faster pace, and more in depth, the difference that makes the difference in what that musician might be doing. Or if there's some field of art that really intrigues you, or if there's some field of psychology that intrigues you. There was a period of time I modeled software engineers to see if I could develop that way of thinking. And so it's a really great set of modeling tools. Now, I've also used these modeling tools to model pathology. So I spent 10 years in mental health with the chronically mentally ill and developmentally disabled, also working with a lot of addictions and dual diagnosis. And I was really curious about how people got upset, how people got panic attacks, how people got depressed, how people got stuck. So I started modeling using NLP, kind of the structure of that, so I could better understand how to help them become more resourceful or change it or improve their situation. So a great set of modeling tools. The second way to think about NLP is a set of processes that have been archived as a result of that modeling. So, since its original development, this field keeps growing and growing and growing. And over time, they modeled how people handled trauma. So we now have an NLP trauma process. Robert Dilts did a lot in modeling how people actually get allergies. And there's an NLP allergy process. One of the processes you'll learn during this course, which is one of my favorites, is they noticed that certain therapists had a way of dealing with shocking images that seemed to really work. And, if someone has a shocking image in their mind, like they see a dead body or they see something horrific in a crash or something like that, or they have some shocking moment, there's a process for that. If someone is stuck and confused and can't make a decision, and they feel conflicted about something, there's a process for that. So there's all these processes, and we keep adding to it. Robert Dilts modeled geniuses, and so he's got, the Disney strategy, which you're going to learn in your last module with us. And he was modeling how Walt Disney created all these amazing things, right? Like the first animated films in Epcot Center in Disneyland. Okay. And let me throw this nugget out here right now. If at any point you start to go, God, I don't know if I can get this stuff. I don't know if I can wrap my mind around this, or I don't know if I'm smart enough to learn this. Walt Disney before he ever created Disneyland, before he ever did animated films, he actually attempted to be a writer for a newspaper. And he was fired from that newspaper because the senior editor said he lacked creativity and imagination. Okay. That's how he got where he was. Okay. Did you guys know that the Honda, who created Honda Corporation, was fired by Toyota for not being very good? And then he went and created his own car company. Did you know, ladies, that Vera Wang, before she became a famous, costume designer, actually wanted to be an ice skater, and that didn't work out for her? Okay. Marilyn Monroe was fired from her first contract because they said she didn't have enough, star quality. Okay. And the list goes on and on and on and on. And one of the things we've noticed is, and this is an NLP pattern, is that the key difference between people that are very successful and people that aren't is all of us experience lots of failures and lots of challenges along the way, but really successful people just keep going anyway. And so put that in the back of your mind and keep it with you. Okay. And the third way to think about NLP is an ongoing field of study. The study of the structure of this seemingly subjective experience, this human patterning, and it's constantly growing. It's constantly growing. How many people have heard of EMDR, right, as a therapeutic technique? Well, that was developed by Francine Shapiro after she learned about eye accessing cues, which you're going to learn about in this program, from Robert Dilts and Richard Bandler. And she took that and took that into the area that she was really interested in and developed this whole field of EMDR. So there's a lot you can do with this. And one of the things that I know Tim, Nick, and I are really interested and curious about is to see where you go with it as you start to learn this stuff. Okay, so that's a little bit about the history of NLP. Here's what it's good for, though. Let's cover this real quick. The ability to manage your internal mental and emotional state. Right? The ability to stay resourceful in otherwise challenging times. To stay resourceful. Now, notice too, a lot of times when we get stressed and we're feeling stress and pressure, what happens is it feels like our world is closing in on us, right? As stress and pressure increases, we start to lose choice, right? And if under extreme stress and pressure, when we're really like our backs against the wall, a lot of times, we're reduced down to grunting expletives or, fight or flight or freeze kind of a response. And so as we add in more choice, which NLP does, it helps us to open ourselves back up and stay more and more resourceful in times where in the past, maybe we weren't so resourceful. And, we're a big believer in the field of NLP that choice is better than no choice. That will give you a higher degree of behavioral flexibility. It will dramatically increase the speed with which you learn. This is what saved my bacon in college, because the standard ways of learning were not working for me at the time. Okay, for whatever reason, they weren't working. I had to go and find and create new ways for me to learn and get information into my brain. And neurolinguistic programming gave me the behavioral flexibility and the sensory acuity to notice what was working and to adopt that and learn new ways. So it also will make your learning way more economical. And this will make sense as we get towards the end of the program, because with the tools of NLP, you start to notice the difference that makes the difference, which allows you to not waste time spinning your wheels, doing things that don't make a difference. And then it'll help you become a way more influential member of any group that you are part of, family, community, tribe, or team, especially when we cover the section on rapport. Okay, so I'm going to stop that there. And I'm going to hand it over to Nick here. I think the next thing we have here is we can start doing the overview of the curriculum. Nick, is there anything you wanted to throw in before we start going into that? You're muted, Nick.
Got to unmute first, huh? I just wanted to add that in the history of NLP, although Bandler and Grinder are the primary developers, there were a lot of people that were involved in the original work that together their individual input was what produced the magic of NLP. So originally there was a group called Meta that included Richard and John and a variety of other people, some of the powerful people that went on to do other things, not necessarily following in the footsteps of Richard and John. And as Robert pointed out, a lot of NLP has developed since then. So even though they're pointed out as the founders, there's just a vast array of people that have been contributing to the field. And that's what I love about NLP is you could be a contributor to this field. Like for instance, in my case, I became curious about how people create a sense of owing or being owed in life, what I call emotional debt, which led me not only to formal research in the field of exchange theory and the norm of reciprocity, but what do people do internally to create that? And out of that came a book that I wrote called I Owe You, You Owe Me, along with processes for resolving guilt and for being able to get over resentment and have forgiveness that work on the basis of what creates those things. So you can develop something because of the tools in NLP and contribute to the field. That's why it's a growing field. So I love that that aspect of NLP. It's always bringing something new into the arena. So I wanted to add that in as a comment. And also this idea of learning in terms of the act of being curious, like Robert mentioned, curiosity as sort of like observation without judgment. I love the state of curiosity. And I think if you can bring curiosity into your life in more situations, you will become a magical being. Because out of curiosity, curiosity will lead you to places you might not have gone otherwise. Will open your heart and your mind to things you might not even thought existed before. It will enrich your world and take you to places that can really be useful and powerful. So I encourage you to bring curiosity to these kinds of situations. It's the basis of learning. I think it's what's behind the beginner's mind. And I like to try to bring a beginner's mind, even though I've had a lot of years with NLP, try to just set all that aside for a while and come fresh, come open. Robert said some things today I wouldn't have thought of before. So I'm always here to learn as well. So on this journey, we're going to be covering lots of topics along the way. So I'm going to start talking about what the course overview is, give you kind of a general overview. Typically, originally, this was taught in live courses over weekends and was divided into segments. And then when we went online, we broke it into 15 sessions and we kind of broke those up a little bit, but I'm going to give you kind of the main pieces that we'd be covering along the way. So the first 3 modules are really about mindset and how to develop personal and professional excellence. So in that, we'll talk about the structure of experience, the NLP map and model, and how to use it to understand yourself and others, which, by the way, was to me, one of the greatest gifts of learning NLP. How many of you are people watchers? Anybody here people watchers? I'm a people watcher. I travel a lot. I'm in airports a lot, or, in train stations and other places. I love to watch people. And I'll tell you, NLP elevated my people watching skills just tremendously, because there's so many distinctions in NLP that can help you to understand what might be going on inside of a person just from things that they do on the outside. You'll also learn a little bit about how to get in rapport with people, how to connect with people so that you can not only find out where they're coming from, but maybe start to move the conversation in a direction that you'd like it to go into. You'll learn little skills for managing yourself, something called the circle of excellence, how to be able to step into a powerful state. You'll learn also about this a system of internal, you could say, submodalities or parts of experience that help us to, you could say, control our brain. And then you also learn about perceptual positions, the ways that we can view things so that we can understand things more deeply. So there's a lot of stuff that's packed into the first part. That's the first 3 modules: personal and professional excellence and mindset. Do you want to add anything to that, Robert?
No, I think you pretty much summed it up. One of the really cool things about module 1, though, where it really NLP completely departs from therapy, is think of a lot of therapy is about kind of exterior, talking about the stories and the meaning we make about stories and looking at things differently. And NLP definitely covers that a lot because it challenges a lot of that. But it also has this interior potential as well, in terms of taking a look at how we structure those thoughts in our mind and what we can do with it. So there's actually a belief change process that happens when you learn the NLP map the way that I teach it, and then you do what's called the submo swap in there. So that first section, there's going to be a full-on belief change. And here's what I mean by that. You're going to have a direct experience of taking something that has happened that you cannot change. And notice there's so many things that have happened throughout our life where it happened, we felt a certain way about it, and it's like, God, I wish I could change it. I wish I could go back and redo it. I wish I could erase it, but I can't. And a lot of us carry that stuff around like an albatross around our neck, affecting us. And it just feels like that's the way it is. I can't do anything about it, what have you. So I want you to have this direct experience in that first module of taking something that happened that you can't change and changing the way you feel about it. Changing the way you feel about it, even though you can't change any of the facts about what happened. That gives you tremendous power because it really installs this belief that it is relative, it is subjective. If I don't like the way I feel about something, I can actually change it, which means I'm not the victim, I'm not in the passenger seat, I'm actually driving the car. Okay. And so it's really going to give you a lot of personal power. And I can't just stress enough how important that is. And it's really like, to me, it's preparing the soil for the whole rest of the training. Now, in section 2, we're going to, which is the next 3 modules, we're going to go into how to get clear about what you really want and to know what gets in the way. Because a lot of times when, and I've been doing coaching for a long time, Nick's been doing coaching for a long time, people are very, very good. Your friends have probably been like this. You've probably been like this. I know I've been like this. We're really good at knowing what we don't want, right? Or knowing what we don't like. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it isn't until we get it that we realize that that's true. So one of the things that's really, really important in being powerful and in doing this kind of work is getting really good at knowing what you really want and knowing the difference between how it is now, present state, and how we want it to be, desired state. And to do that, we have a series of what we call well-formedness conditions. And it's basically how to develop a really strong, compelling goal that's likely to succeed long-term. And one of the reasons it's likely to succeed long-term is it's really taking into account not just what you want right now, but taking into account how is this really going to affect you and all parts of you and the people around you and the community around you and the world around you moving forward. Is it in line with what you value most? I'll tell you a quick story. Years ago, I had a guy that worked for Cisco, and he had spent the majority of his professional career saving up enough money to buy a business, and he always wanted to own his own business. He had this dream of owning his own business and how great it was going to be and how wonderful it was going to be. And so he saved all his money and he spent almost his entire life savings acquiring this business. Now, this guy was a high-level technical engineer at Cisco. And he bought an oil stop business where you change oils and stuff like this. Like, it was an easy business for him to run. For him, it was like, it was super simple, super easy. It was a franchise. So he should have been able to do this in his sleep. But when I met him, he had all but run the business into the ground, and he couldn't understand why. He couldn't understand why he couldn't get himself to do this simple, easy, tasky stuff. And the well-formance conditions and what you're going to learn in section 2 would have prevented that from ever happening. Because what he wasn't conscious of is that what was driving him to own his own business was really a deep-seated desire to be free, to do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. And a lot of people think, once I'm my own boss, that's how life is. But he went from a job that was 40 hours a week, maybe 50, 60 when they're getting ready to release a product, to a brick and mortar business open 7 days a week. It was a prison for him neurologically. He went to a job that required him to be there 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And because it directly violated one of his most important values of freedom, subconsciously, he sabotaged it and was running the thing into the ground. So this is the kind of thing that Module 2 really prevents from happening. Okay, it helps you develop a truly well-formed outcome, a really good goal that's in line with what you value, so it's much more likely to succeed, and in a way where you can actually vet it. You know if you're getting it or if you're not, in no uncertain terms. Okay, in no uncertain terms. So there's so much in there. We're also going to teach you, so we'll teach you well-formance conditions in that. We're going to teach you something called meta-outcoming, which is kind of the goal of the goal. So again, you know why you're doing what you're doing, so that you don't drift off course and you don't end up setting yourself up like this gentleman did. You're going to learn skills like backtracking. You're also going to learn, which is this ability to really help another person feel deeply understood. And it also, the really good backtracking will completely neutralize a volatile situation. So it's a really good communication tool. We're also going to then start to introduce you to what's called the neurological levels of change in this section. And this is, again, something where NLP sets itself apart from everything else in a huge way. You know, how many times have you been stuck in a problem or a situation or a challenge, and you're thinking, okay, what do I do next? And one of your friends says, just do this, just do that. And the advice seems good, and it even seems like it might work, but you just can't get yourself to do it, right? Well, one of the things that Robert Dilts noticed, you know, as he was one of the, developing NLP right along with Richard and John, was that there are different neurological levels to how change takes place. This is originally came from Gregory Bates, and we'll get into this in great detail. But think of it this way. If you don't believe that you're good at math, if you believe, like you've been convinced that you're just not good at math, you'll never be good at math, you're not a math person, do you think you're going to learn how to do a spreadsheet? Do you think you're going to develop math skills? Probably not. Or if you believe that you don't have a voice and that you sound horrible and that you can never sing, do you think you're going to develop a singing voice? Probably not. And so the neurological levels will really be a very powerful tool for helping you identify what level a problem exists on, so you know what level to go to resolve it. And again, this is something that a lot of other therapies and basic coaching just can't even touch. And it's so incredibly powerful. So there's so much there. We're going to get into that. And then you're also going to learn about the meta model in that section, which is like one of the cornerstones of NLP. What Richard and John were first doing with Fritz and Satir and Erickson is they were developing this series of inquiry questions and challenges called the meta model. And the meta model was originally developed to recover lost information. They realized that, what's in Fabian's mind, right, when he thinks about, going to school or going to work or a relationship, it may be very different than what's in Ivy's mind when she thinks about going to school or going to work or what have you. If you're thinking, if we're talking about Washington and arguing over where the best pizza is in Washington, but you're talking about Washington State and I'm talking about Washington, D.C., we're never going to connect. Okay. And so they realized that people were operating with these different maps of reality, and the meta model was a way of recovering that lost information. It's also an amazing tool for taking what seems like a big problem and reducing it down to a nice little manageable chunk size that you can work with and shift. Okay. I'm going to hand it back over to you, Nick, for the next section, and or if you want to add anything on that before you move on.
Yeah, first I'd like to point out that when Robert was talking about the individual he worked with who had the franchise and how he was out of alignment with his values, Robert pointed to his heart. One thing I really want to emphasize is that a lot of what makes us successful is when we can align our head, our heart, and our gut, and go in a direction that we're truly congruent about. And I believe, in fact, there's a great quote that the origins of which are somewhat unknown. It's been attributed to Native Americans and other people along the way, and that is the longest journey you will ever take is the journey from your head to your heart. And I know for me, and how many of you can relate, how many of you set goals that you didn't achieve? I mean, it's okay to admit it here. And how many of you set goals because you were given the goal and you felt you should do it? You know, this is a common one. The world is imposing on us a lot of times things that it believes we should do. And if we take those on, there's a part of us that may not be on board with that. It's out of alignment with our own hearts. You know, how many of you have done this? You go for a goal you think you want, and then when you get it, you realize it's not really what you wanted. How many of you had that happen? And the amazing thing about NLP is the ability to really connect with yourself in ways that you know who you are and what you really want. And you learn how to live more from the heart, how to be more in alignment with your gut, how to have the full self on board. And to me, that's the most beautiful thing about NLP, is that we get that kind of alignment inside. And I know we've been covering a lot here. So before we go on to more content, I want to ask you to take a moment and kind of connect with your heart. What has been singing to you out of this that you might like to get out of this program? What of the things we've mentioned so far could be things that could be useful for you? I'd like you to take a minute and maybe jot down a few things that you want to get, that you might like to come out of this program with, because your vision of where you're going to end out can guide the process along the way. So I'd just like to give maybe 30 seconds of quiet time for you to reflect on what we said so far and identify some possible things you might want to get out of this course. And again, that could relate to the mindset things we talked about, or to the goals and the ability to manifest your goals. And as we continue along, you can be noting the things that might be inspiring to you or might touch you on some level or might remind you of something that you'd like to change in your life. I found along the way when I was learning NLP that if I identified specific things to use what I was learning for, that would lead to something, that the learning became richer and deeper and more meaningful to me. So I invite you to kind of hold that space as we go forward. So we talked about modules 1 through 3, the mindset and personal and professional excellence. Modules 4 through 6, how to get clear about what you really want and knowing what gets in the way and some of the aspects of our internal experience that can contribute to that. Modules 7 through 9 are really about accessing feelings or states of mind on command. It's about being able to use your whole inner world as your resource toolkit, and how to use language patterns that can create change, language patterns that have come from the field of hypnosis, but can be incorporated into the everyday world in a way that can touch yourself and touch other people, that can open us up to possibilities. During this time, we'll be exploring how to elicit any state that you want, or how to break states when it's useful. How many of you have been in rapport with somebody, you're connected with somebody, you're ready to exit the conversation, you give cues that you want to exit, but they keep talking or they keep connecting? How many have had that happen? You're really ready to go, but you've done such a good job of getting in rapport that they don't want you to go. And sometimes we have to know how to break rapport in order to move on, and break rapport elegantly in a way that it won't be offensive to the person. Looking at the watch might not do it sometimes. So how to elicit a state and break a state when useful. You'll learn a technique called anchoring, which is a core skill in NLP. In fact, when I was learning NLP, we were given the assignment at one point in time to explain all of this thing called neuro-linguistic programming from any one part of it. Kind of the idea of the holographic universe. So, everything is in everything else. And you could explain all of NLP as the simple act of anchoring, which is connecting an internal state with a cue. You could say all learning is really connecting some experience, something inside, with some cue, so that when you hear something later on, that comes to mind. So you'll learn anchoring. Anchoring is a way of directing states in yourself and others. You'll learn how to integrate anchors so that you can collapse states and create your own magnificent states of excellence that could be a combination of courage and curiosity and creativity, or whatever set you'd like to put in that. You'll learn the ability to separate between two primary states. One of them is associated, which is when you're in an experience, experiencing it with your senses fully, richly, completely. Could even be a memory, but you're remembering it as if you're right there, versus being dissociated, which is when you're outside of an experience. That's one of the primary distinctions that's used a lot in NLP techniques, is the ability to dissociate and the ability to associate. You'll learn how to create and use what's called future pacing. Future pacing is the ability to place in your future specific experiences. It's the tool that actually has been used by athletes and performers throughout history, which is when you vividly imagine how you're going to behave in a specific context and you connect the two together, so that it's more likely when you come into that context, that behavior will be initiated. It's the kind of thing that could allow you to remember to do things in the future. If you're wondering if you need to call somebody in the future, you might make a note of it somewhere. Well, what reminds you to look at that note? You could use anchoring to anchor it so that when you walked in the door of your house, the doorknob of your house could bring up the phone call, so that you touch the doorknob and the phone call comes to mind. You walk in the door, you make the phone call you wanted to make. NLP is masterful at being able to help you link things together in a way that makes your world work. You'll learn a technique called the new behavior generator, which is a kind of an advanced form of this future pacing, where you create new behaviors and put them into your life. Simple one for me is that for years, a long time ago, before I learned NLP, actually into learning NLP a bit, I would drive away from my house and get who knows how far into my work or wherever I was going, and I'd start to wonder, did I close my garage door? How many of you have done that kind of thing? Did I turn off the oven? Did I, whatever it happens to be? And I realized that my pattern was, when I went away, I didn't have a way of knowing whether I had closed the garage door or not. So I decided to use this technique called new behavior generator to create a pattern, so that when I backed out of my garage, I would watch the garage door come down, and as it came down, I would say, the eagle has landed. And then I would drive away, and I'll tell you, with that strategy, I never again had a problem with forgetting whether the garage door was closed, except when I didn't fulfill the strategy. So one day after I'd done this beautifully for a few months, I go driving down the road, I think, did I close my garage door? Why don't I remember? And I realized I had been backing out. My cat was playing in the front yard, and I was all distracted looking at the cat, and I drove off. So the only reason it didn't work was because I didn't use the strategy. And one of the things you'll find out as we go on later on, we'll talk about this, is this whole world of strategies. But what I did is I used a new behavior generator to put a strategy in so that I would know my garage door was closed. And then we'll learn the opposite of the meta model. So Robert talked about the meta model. The meta model is a drill down technique. It's questions that allow you to chunk things down and find out what's really at the heart of your experiences or at the base of things. It's a tool that's used in business, and in fact is a necessary ingredient in successful business, to be able to chunk things down to what specifically you want to accomplish or what specifically the issue is. The Milton model is the use of the same patterns, but in the other way around. It's the creative use of vague language, so that people can fill in the details from their own experience. One of the things that Milton Erickson was known for is he would teach a group of students and he would tell a story in his teaching, and the students would argue on the breaks about who the story was told for. Each of them saying, oh, he told it for me because he said this. No, oh, he told it for me because he said this. And it was because he used vague language creatively in that each person could fill in the details as if it was tailored to them. And so I think you'll find these kind of patterns can be incredibly useful in your life in helping you to manage your own experience and influence the experience of other people. And again, I'd like you to take a moment and think, is there anything out of that that you might want to add into your goals or desires over this course? And Robert, you can add whatever you want to this as well. Oh, you're muted, Robert. I'm not the only one.
So one thing, and by the way, folks, we ask that you mute yourself at all times unless you're speaking, just because, you know, noise happens and in the recording, it will flash over to you, right? So if your cat runs in the room, suddenly everyone will see you and your cat and they won't hear Nick or whatever. But for those of you who have tried, because I know so many people, I've dealt with so many coaching clients over the years, it's like, oh, I tried visualization. I tried picturing what I want, you know, or, you know, picturing what I want to get motivated doesn't work. There are very simple tweaks when we get in there that absolutely make a night and day difference, right? That make a night and day difference, and things that you would never think of. And as we go through this with NLP, you go, oh, that's why that didn't work. Okay, so it is a whole nother level of doing this. I've worked with lots of athletes, lots of different people who have tried visualizing. They've tried doing some of these things that seem similar, and they didn't work until they did it the way that we instructed them to. Because again, we're aware and noticing the difference that makes the difference. And one of the other big benefits of the Milton model and this generative language is it allows you to take a very powerful win or change that you have and multiply that into other areas of your life, which is really incredible. You know, one of my first experiences with NLP was quitting smoking. I quit smoking 20-something years ago, and I walked because now my ex-wife quit with Wellbutrin before they relabeled it Zyban. And so that was great. She quit, and she gave the credit to the Zyban, a little bit of credit to herself for sticking it out, you know, but that was kind of it. I quit with the power of the mind, NLP and hypnosis. And I walked around for the next decade going, my God, if I could feel this strongly one day about cigarettes and then the next day, like completely different, like if I could change my mind that powerfully in one area, what other areas could I change my mind? And where else have I completely underestimated my own mind, my own powers? That was the power of that kind of Milton model language at hand. So it's a really, really useful tool for taking change and really multiplying it out in a number of different ways. Okay. So do you want to give them about the 30 seconds to jot down a few notes before I jump into the next section, Nick?
Sure. Also, we've been at it about an hour. It might be worthwhile to take a little short break at this point in time before we move on. What do you think?
Sure. What do you have in mind?
I was thinking maybe 5 minutes just for people to use the bathroom or whatever. And you could also take that time to note things you might want to get out of the course.
Okay. Yeah, raise your hand if you'd like to take a 5-minute break, a little bathroom break, grab a glass of water, something like that before we come back and wrap up for the next hour. Okay, great. So we'll go ahead and take a 5-minute break. I'm going to put the pause on the recording. And it's 1:07 now, so I'll set the timer. We'll see you back here in 5 minutes exactly.
Okay. So you might take a minute to think about anything that you might want to consider to use as a focus for this time together from that set of material. Maybe there's something from your past you'd like to clean up. Maybe you'd like to set a new momentum for your future. So take a moment and
did you say anything about the Disney strategy yet either, Nick?
No, the Disney strategy is in the next section.
Okay. Joseph, did you have a question?
Oh, yes, thank you. So when you're using techniques like these, like with the example of the veteran, let's say helicopter fell on him. So you help him get over the trauma of the helicopter falling on him. Is that something where he's fine and then it starts to come back later and so you have to do that technique again? Or is it something like you've done it, it's kind of been like cleared or resolved or whatever, and now he's like fine? Maybe other aspects of it will come back, but so it's in different ways. But
well, in the case of trauma specifically, what's happening is a past event is being neurologically re-experienced as a present day threat. So it's a neurological reconsolidation technique, and there's a lot of science behind it. There's pre and post brain scans you can see on it, and when we get down that road, we'll get to that. But with that, when you resolve those traumas, they're done. Same thing with shocking images. NLP work tends to be that way. Now, where a lot of times stuff seems to reemerge, you see this a lot in talk therapy, and I'm all for it. I mean, I've got a therapist and a coach, but when you try to rewrite a story, right? So let's say I just try to talk you out of your belief or talk you out of your story, and I tell you a better story. And in that moment, because I'm flooding your mind with this different way of thinking, or you go to a Tony Robbins seminar, some seminar, for that moment, your mind's consumed with something else. You have a very short attention span, which you're going to learn when you get into the NLP map. On our best days, we're tracking about 9 things, at the very best, usually 4 or 5. So whatever's dominating the forefront of our minds tends to lead us. But if those old beliefs, if those old patterns of thinking, ways of talking to yourself, ways of processing, questions you ask yourself when thinking about things, if all of that still re-exists, it's like a weed. It'll keep working, and then pretty soon you'll see it sprout right back up. So when stuff comes back up, that's usually what's happening. Okay? So with NLP work, when it's done properly, unless you do something to undo it or what have you, that stuff will not come back. Now, one of the things I will also add is that, and you'll see it in the video when I showed the demo of me working with his vet, is at the end, he actually did do some crying at the end, because a lot of times when there's something like a trauma, the person has never gotten to experience the grief of the loss. They've never gotten there yet. So sometimes once one thing resolves, it allows them to then further heal, but they might be going through those stages of dying, and and now they have to go through some grief and then some acceptance and some other things. But it won't be the same thing if it's done properly. Like we now know exposure therapy for trauma, which was very popular for a long time, is actually very harmful for a majority of the people that use it. And I've also seen, I had one client, so I had a lawyer sending me domestic violence cases, and one of the women that I worked with, her therapist, who's very well-meaning, after I'd done the work and helped her resolve the trauma, her therapist said, okay, well, now that you've done that, you can really, I want you to imagine you're facing your aggressor. And she basically had the client relive it in what we call first person associated, which you'll learn in this program. And that caused her to start to re-traumatize herself because of that. So I had to have a talk with the therapist and then clean it up. Yeah. So that's why we don't teach you these things in week 1 and week 2 and week 3. We teach it down the road once you learn other things like ecology and how to keep someone safe, and making sure that we've done the preliminary work and all that. Yeah. Great question though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Robert, you want to finish up with modules 13 through 15?
Yeah, well, I mean, it has exploring submodalities, swish and phobia, and strategies. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I thought we kind of talked about that a little bit. So in this last segment, it's all about eliminating phobias, shocking images, how to resolve other problems, then also how to create I know it's because I'm looking at a different one. In that last module, basically what we're doing is we're helping you get ready and plan for the future. So one of the big processes you're going to learn there is going to be the Disney strategy, right? Because you already covered fast phobia and visual switch, Nick.
Yeah.
Earlier. Okay. Yeah. Those are just, I love those processes, but Disney strategy and other planning strategies for the future is the focus of that very last kind of segment that we're going to be doing. And, Robert Dilts spent a lot of time modeling Walt Disney, who was really great at creating new things, amazing things. He was the first to do animated films. He was the first to do something like Disneyland, Epcot Center, etc. And what's really interesting is most of us naturally do the Disney strategy backwards, which is why we don't think big and we don't do great things, right? He learned that there's like these different segments of how to do it. And so we'll get into that during that process, but you're going to learn the very strategy that Walt Disney used to plan for the future and create amazing things and set amazing goals. Most of the time what we do is we have our stories about our limitations and what we can't do and etc. And so we start by thinking small and we never get outside our own limitations, our own limited thinking. And we have this, every time we try to dream, like have any of you ever had this where every time you try to have a dream or you try to get excited about something, there's this other party that comes in and just is so critical and so judgmental, it tears it apart. And then before you even start, you give up. Yeah. Okay. The Disney strategy will help fix that. It'll give you a whole different way of doing it. It will also, in that last segment, you're going to learn how to, and no one is better at this in the world than Tim Halbum. You're going to be able to ask someone a question and watch what they do with their eyes. And you'll be able to elicit the strategy of how they make a decision, how they know when they like something, right? How they decide to take action and do something. You'll be able to, in just talking to people, watch their eyes and get ideas on what they're doing inside their mind to come to the conclusions that they are, stuff that they will not even be aware of. And so you'll be able to start to elicit these strategies like decision-making strategies, convincer strategies, etc. And not only do you want to know that about other people, you want to know that about yourself. And I want to say this here because NLP often gets a bad rap. And it gets a bad rap because it's powerful. And because it's powerful, people can use it to try to manipulate. There's like pickup artists and stuff like that. But you know what you can also do? If you can elicit someone's love strategy, for example, and you really love that person, you can help them feel more loved by you. And I don't know about you, but the people that I love and care about, I want them to feel that I love them. I want them to feel cared for by me. And when I learned NLP, I realized that what makes me feel loved and cared for may not be the same for Nick. So if I take the time to thoughtfully notice how Nick processes that, or how my boys, for example, Dashiell and Heath, process that, I can then start to show them love and nurturing in a way that works for them. If I'm helping a client, get over a big lifelong challenge and start to believe in themselves again, what worked for me often doesn't necessarily work for them. And so this, it really helps us start to learn how these people think and how their strategies work. And, think of NLP, it's like, it's like any other, it's like a tool in a sense. I mean, I know it's a field of study, but like what makes a tool good or bad is how you use it. Okay. And so, Nick and I have had this discussion before. We really believe that if you really embody the presuppositions of NLP, which we learned in the beginning, then you are ethical, you are kind, you are loving, you are doing things that are good for yourself and everyone else in the world, because we're all in this ship together. We really are. And so when you really love and you really care about people, it helps you be more loving and more caring and more thoughtful for them. Okay. And the last segment, we're going to just kind of prepare you and give you like, these are the final tool sets that you need to start to really plan a super compelling future. And then there's even a bonus in there that we don't advertise, but Nick and I did a hypnotic integration of the entire practitioner. And that is in the bonus section that you will find at the end of this treasure trail of knowledge that you're going to be going through. So that is also going to be at the very end there for you so that you can integrate it. Because this is something that like you're just going to ideally go over again and again and again. And I don't know about you, but I wish I could learn in a linear fashion. I learned A, I got A. I learned B, I got B. I learned C. Like, how many people want to be able to learn that way? Like, I've always wanted to be able to learn that way. That's not how I learn. I learned like Huckleberry Finn painting that white picket fence with that big coarse brush and the knotty wood fence. And I put some paint on there and there's blotches here and blotches there and a little bit here and a little bit there. But if I keep going over it again and again from this angle and that angle, whatever, then eventually I get it. And that's just how I learn. And so in that last segment, we're going to address all that stuff. And again, there is a lot of redundancy in this program because our goal is not to give you information and then wave at you as you leave. Our goal is to get this stuff in your bones. And what we're looking for is by that last segment, we're seeing it in your affect, in the way that you show up, in the way that you handle feedback, in the questions that you ask, the things you're noticing. We are looking for it in your behavior and in your way of being. And the goal is by the end of this program, you are getting that in your bones and you're getting up and running, and it is changing you. It is affecting you in a powerful way. And whatever area you are into, you know, whatever your vocation or avocation that you're into, you can take this and it will make it even better. Okay, Christine, you got your hand up?
Yes, just one question for you. What is the general consensus of NLP like to the public? Like if someone sees you're an NLP practitioner, what do they think of?
It depends.
I think
on
that's a
who
hard
the
question
public
to
is.
answer. I mean, it depends on who you ask, but go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, it depends on who the public is that you're talking to. Yeah, you know, the NLP has had mixed reviews in various places and for various reasons. Some of them for the reasons Robert mentioned. It's a powerful technique, and some people have used it in ways that are the negative connotation of manipulation, where people feel like they're being made to do something. It's been included in TV shows. There was one of the, what was it, detective TV show where NLP was used for murder. So, so there's, you know, there is this kind of idea that the idea is powerful and it can be used in an abusive way. There's also some issues from NLP because the early founders of NLP were kind of, they disconnected from research and kind of poo-pooed research. And early on in NLP, there was a research study that was conducted based on actually a misconception. It wasn't actually even what NLP said, but they used a study and they said NLP doesn't work or is a pseudoscience now. So if you look on Wikipedia, Wikipedia basically has an article that says NLP is a pseudoscience and it's, you know, not a valid approach to doing things. And that Wikipedia article actually has not allowed multiple attempts to update it from people in the NLP field who just want to give different view of it, and they reject it every time. They will not allow us to update it. So as a result of that, NLP has formed its own little Wikipedia, I don't know what it's called, but there's an access to NLP information. Research and Recognition Project has had a lot of trouble getting support for the research in NLP because of this notion, this idea of NLP from the research world. But the Research and Recognition Project now has, what is it, 5 studies that have proven, peer-reviewed studies that have showed 90% or higher success rate with severe traumas with veterans, higher than, way beyond what anything else has done. 5 different studies. And yet places like Wikipedia won't even accept that, even though it's peer-reviewed now. So NLP has to kind of overcome a reputational disadvantage from some of the approaches of the early founders and because of some of the ways people have used NLP.
Right.
But I found there are some circles where NLP is very welcomed. It's becoming a lot more welcome in the business world, actually, than before, because they find it works.
It's going to change too. So Frank Bork, who is the head of the Research and Recognition Project, and Lisa Rizek just published a second volume of research-based evidence that NLP works. And let me just tell you something too. That trauma process, Frank did a version of it called the Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories. That was done after he worked with 200 survivors of 9/11. These were people that were in the building when the building was struck, and 200 survivors with severe trauma. And I think on the Research and Recognition Project, they have like hundreds of testimonials from veterans with the most severe, military and sexual trauma that you can imagine. So this stuff is definitely the real deal. It definitely works. And I think public opinion will eventually change over time. But again, it's a tool. So there's been guys there's this guy, I won't mention his name, but he did like a seduction program with it because it can make you more influential. And there's cheesy sales guys who'll use it, and they'll try to use like embedded commands and go, buy now, you're ready to buy something. And it's just, and they don't do that with a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy because it's just too complex.
Mhm.
I think one of the reasons NLP got abused a little bit is because it's what I call water cooler friendly. It's very easy to learn. It's very easy to get up and running with it. And it's very powerful. Okay. And I will tell you something, all of the good therapists that I know, many of the high level professionals in different fields all use it. The reason Tony Robbins does not use NLP directly and he changed it to NAC is because he got sued for using the term NLP.
Mhm.
But if you like Tony Robbins,
I love it.
that's where he learned it. NLP and Jim Rohn.
Yeah,
Yep.
Jim Rohn. I follow him, both of those two. So yes. So I'm just putting that out on my credentials. I don't because I'm proud of this and I think NLP is awesome. I've worked with some of it. So I just was curious what the public was and, if anyone clients because of it, well, that's okay, right?
Yeah, and I've been doing it for 20 years. So I've got, I've worked with professional athletes. I've worked with, people that have been on TV. I've worked with all kinds of people, housewives, students, everybody. And, people that, in my experience, the people that have that opinion, they don't really understand it. They haven't taken a course or something like that. And the minute you do, if you take a course from a decent, reputable, place like our institute, or one of our friends, then, they're gonna instantly become a believer because they see the utility in it. It improves relationships, it improves their lives. It improves every aspect of it. I shudder to think where I would be and what my state in life would be had I not learned NLP many, many years ago. So,
Robert, I'm noticing we have about 12 minutes left.
Yeah.
And we've been talking a lot about the kinds of content we'll cover, and hopefully you've been coming up with some ideas of what you'd like to get out of it. But one of the things I found most useful in my life, and I use this in small ways and big ways, is to really take to heart what Stephen Covey said, and that is begin with the end in mind. And I think it's really useful for you to take a moment now and really think about what you would like to get out of this. And I would encourage you to find one thing you'd like to get out of the class personally and one thing professionally. And identify, one example from each of those that if you came out of that, it could really help you in your life in some powerful and maybe even transformative way. I'd add to that two other elements. So those two, I'd also add, how would you like to think and feel when you come out of the class? How would you like to be as a person when you come out of the class? And the third thing is, what kind of experience would you like to have while you're going through the class? So when I say I like to do that in small and big ways, before I have a meeting, like before this meeting, I imagine I want to come out of this meeting, thinking and feeling that I had a great time together, that I connected with a great group of people, that I could see possibilities for what we could enjoy together. I'd like to come out of this knowing that we started a journey together. We laid the foundations for a great journey together. I'd like to go through the experience having a time where I not only learn and I not only feel a new community forming, but where I have a little bit of fun as well. I'd like to be able to come out of this at the end of this training. I personally would like to come out of this with a sense that each and every one of you have something from the field of NLP, something you learned in this class that literally will change your life, that will make your experience more powerful, more your own, and more available to you, that will give you more resources and more context in life, that will allow you to rise to your greatness. That's what I like to do. Create a vision of where you're going. And that vision then becomes a part of your heart that's collecting the little pieces that make up who you are. And Robert, what I would like to recommend is maybe give them a minute or two just to jot that down. We could then either break into groups and have them share it, or we could just do a wrap up and have them share a little bit at the opening of the next time around. Do you have a preference on that?
I think we should take 2 or 3, but then, I think that one of the things we need to do before we close out is certification requirements. I need to just kind of quickly go over that.
Yep.
Make sure that we have that covered. That's the only other thing I have on my list that we have to do. Yeah.
So this might be a good time just to give you a minute to start organizing those things. And then maybe in the first round, we could have people share a little bit of their goals. What do you think?
Sounds good.
Turn it over to you because you're the logistics man.
Okay, I'm dealing with something here. Okay. All right, so let me talk about certification here real quick. There are 2 required books to read during the course of the training, and we're probably going to ask you to do like a small written assignment or some sort of demonstration from the book at some point. The first book is called The New Technology of Achievement. I know that you can't see the cover here because the cover's gone, but it's called NLP, The New Technology of Achievement, and it is put together. There is no one author. It's the NLP Comprehensive Training Team, okay? So NLP, New Technology of Achievement by the NLP Comprehensive Team. The first one, there's a second one, just this one, okay? This next one is called Powerful Questions and Techniques for Coaches and Therapists. And this is by Tim and Chris Halbum, our buddy Nick LaForce here. This is another awesome book on NLP, and you can get these off of Amazon. I have some as well, but it's probably easier and faster to get it off of Amazon. Okay, those are 2 books we highly recommend that you go through during the training, okay? Okay, all right, so next thing is this. To certify, you are required to attend a minimum of 8 of the 15 practice sessions. There's not a practice session this Saturday because we haven't gotten started yet. But after next week, starting next week, it'll be every Saturday. So you are required to attend 8 of those. Now, sometimes there's a special circumstance where someone's having a hard time getting into a class, or you might meet with 2 other participants on your own. That can still potentially count as a practice session, but you would need to discuss it with me or Nick or Tim ahead of time, because a huge reason for doing the practice session, besides you practicing it and having the experience of receiving a process and having the experience of giving a process, is we are watching and we are noticing what you're doing. We're noticing your level of sensory acuity, notice your level of rapport, noticing your technical competency, etc. Of course, we don't expect it to be perfect, but what we're going to do is, as your coaches and as your trainers, we want to watch what you're doing to see what you know and see what you don't, so that we can encourage you along the way to work on and develop the skills that you need, so that at the end of this, when you get that certificate, you are legit an NLP practitioner. And let me tell you something. We're part of what's called the Global NLP Leadership Summit, which is a group of NLP professionals and institutes from around the world, where we adhere to a set of core standards to make sure that the training is really viable. So when you walk away with a certificate from NLP Institute of California, it is not the same as having one from anyone else, okay? There are a certain number of institutes, a handful of them around the world. And if you walk into any other institute with one of our certificates, they're going to go, okay, these people know what they're doing. Okay. And so that's the difference. So we want to make sure you really know it. We want to make sure you really learn it. And also that allows us to make sure that we give you the teaching and the guidance and the support you need in the areas where maybe you're lacking a little bit to make it better. I was absolutely horrendous at following instructions the first year I did my NLP practitioner training. I thought I knew it all because I read a couple of books. So I got in trouble during my practitioner training for doing like arm levitation integration in the back of the room. I was adding hypnosis to processes, and they kind of called me on it. And honestly, it wasn't until my third go around where I followed it step by step the way it was being taught. And that was the year my learning took a huge jump. I was able to empty my cup and do it the way it was being taught. So we want to make sure that you know that. So you need to do at least 8 of those practice sessions. Now, with the live sessions, we don't really have a requirement on it as long as you go through and you cover that material and you really know it. But I'm going to be straight with you. You're not going to know it as well if you're not here live. If you're not here live, if you're here live, that's the best way to know it. That's the best way to get in your bones. And when I was taking NLP, I couldn't wait for the next session to happen. So the best way to do it is study the prep material ahead of time, be here for the live class. That's the best way to learn it. Second best way, study the prep material and catch the replay and really make sure you watch it. But again, you're not going to be as engaged unless you're actually here. So that's like second tier, okay? And if you don't do any of that, I don't know how you're going to do the practice session and really get it. So this is your opportunity to really get it into your bones and to start that fire that will get you into NLP for the rest of your life. And I promise you it'll be worth it. So 8 of those, let me do 8 here. 8 of those practice sessions is the minimum requirement, but do as many as you can to get certified. At the end of that, if this year, if you're international, if you want to get a certificate from the Institute at the end of the training, that will be available. We just ask that you pay for shipping on the certificate because honestly, sometimes when we're shipping across the world, it can be a couple, $100 to send one certificate. I just spent $100 sending one to Belgium. So we might ask you to help pay for that. But other than that, once you're qualified, we send you that certificate and you have it. This year, by the end of the training, we will also have a badge that you can add to your website as well to show that you're credentialed to our institute. Okay. And then we also encourage you to set a big goal in the beginning of your training. That's one of the things we want to get to. So we'll get to that in the next section, but think about really like what you want. If we could wave a magic wand, what would be different in your life at the end of this training compared to where you are now? And once we get there, you'll be surprised. Many of you will have far surpassed whatever that is. So don't just think of what you want, folks, and get an idea in your head. Write it down. Write it down and put it on paper, and it will blow your mind by week 16 when you look back at what you thought you wanted and what you thought that would look like. Okay? All right. So Nick, you want to close us out here?
Well, as I said earlier, I'm excited to be on this adventure with you. And I don't know, maybe I'll close out with a little poem. I mentioned the journey from the head to the heart, and one of my favorite poems for that is called Sacred Relics. Sacred Relics. And I think a lot of NLP is about reclaiming lost parts of ourselves and reconnecting with aspects of ourselves that we might have previously thought were thwarting us, but might be teaching us. So Sacred Relics. I don't know when I lost my footing on the earth, or when I moved upstairs from the heart to the lofty places where ideas dance. I don't know how many steps I must take to make the pilgrimage back to the Holy Land. But I do know the longing for something that cannot be named, the missing of something unknown, as if the day calls me out to play, because I was once eager to go outside. I once knocked on the doors of friends uninvited. I once moved in my body as if I belonged there. But here I am now in the middle of my life with duties to be done and chores to be completed when the pilgrim comes, knocking on the door of my heart, bringing sacred relics of the life I have not yet lived, ready to take me even as I am, if I am willing to make my way down the stairs and open myself to life once again. And I think this class can be the pilgrim knocking on the door of your heart. This class can be the chance for you to find you have inside of you the resources to step into life and to live your life fully and completely. That it might be something somebody says in the class. It might be a technique that you're guided through, or you're guiding through somebody. You don't know the moment that could be the transformative moment. But to give yourself permission to be on that edge, to be in that place where you might awaken into the full presence of your being, that to me is the greatest gift you can give yourself. And so I invite you to come through this class and let yourself be open to that knock. Let yourself be ready to take that step. And you might just find by the end of the class that you're much more than you ever thought of before. So that's my wish for you. So thank you all for your presence here and your time. And I look forward, as I've mentioned many times, to being on this journey with you.
All right, everyone, we appreciate you being here. So next Tuesday will be module 1. You've got 1 week to go through those prep materials. Again, you don't need to do the live replay, but go through the prep materials. If you want to do the live replay, though, of course, go for it. Also, think about that goal. What do you want? What do you want? If we could wave that magic wand, bring that to the first session. We're going to ask you about that. The format will be this. Tuesdays, we're going to do the live training. So that's when, we might do a demo with one of you. So if you're interested in having us do NLP work with you, one of us trainers doing it with you live online here, jump forward, raise your hand when we ask for volunteers. And ideally, all of you get to volunteer at some point. It's a really wonderful experience to be able to do that. And then the Saturday practice sessions will all be about, that is not teaching, that is practicing. So we will go over ahead of time what you're going to do. But that time is time to break you into groups. So it might be groups of 2, it might be groups of 3, and then we're going to rotate those groups. So ideally, you'll get to work with everyone in class over the course of the 16 weeks. This is a really good practice because getting into rapport and working with different people will make you better at what you do. If you work with the same person over and over again, you might get really good at how to help them, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help you help everybody else. So that diversity is going, and that's why we want the class size. That diversity will be really, really powerful, and it's much more intimate too. You'll get to know each other, and we'll do some kind of get to know each other games as well. Okay. So with that said, it's 2:03. I'm going to stay here though, Julie. I'm going to officially end the call. So we're officially done, but I'm going to stay on and answer questions for the next 10 to 15 minutes or so. But if you need to log off and move on, that's fine. We will always do our best to start on time and end on time. And I apologize again for the technical glitch today. It happened, but normally that doesn't happen. So I've got some pretty good internet here. Okay. So I'll stay on. I'll answer some questions. If you need to go, you're free to go. And then we'll see you next Tuesday. You can always text me if you have questions about the material or personal stuff. Logistical stuff, remember, that goes to patriciaadmin@nlpca.com, and her phone number was in there as well. You can text her. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And thank you so much for signing up and for being part of this. I think you'll really be glad that you did. Okay?
Thanks, everyone. I will see you next week.